Good evening, everybody. I wrote a story that I would like to read to you. I hope you enjoy, and I wish you all the happiest of holidays. Enjoy every moment with your families. It was Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve was always his favorite part of the holidays. Even as a boy, this was a time of excitement that outweighed even the joy of presents from Santa Claus the following morning. That always came with being relatively quiet comparatively, and when it was over, it was over. And this always felt somewhat depressing to him, as it wouldn't occur again until after enduring another year's worth of school, chores, and all the other mundane activities of life. Mundane compared to Christmas, of course. The eve before, however, was always spent at Aunt Cheryl and Uncle Spencer's house. The family was quite large, and I would say close for the most part. Therefore, it was a night surrounded by many loved ones and a great feeling of warmth. All the children played together excitedly in anticipation of what was to come. This excitement was obvious in the chatter and laughter they shared that filled the entire home. It was also a chance for the boy to show the adults how funny he was and the great person he was becoming. When they would compliment him on his performances, it felt like he had just won a great award. It was on his way to becoming someone big and important in life. There was always a giant Douglas fir Christmas tree adorned with decades worth of ornaments and soft white lights that stood proudly in front of the humble bay window at the front of the house in the living room. And of course, as the evening progressed, there was also the wonderful food laid out on the long dining room table. Ham, mashed potatoes, soft warm rolls with a giant dish of butter beside them. And in this family, always a giant bowl of pasta covered with the family's secret sauce and meatballs. Between the tree and the food, quite the magical aroma filled the home. As usual, there was Aunt Martha's ridiculously animated stories that her sister, Aunt Louise, would always scold her for exaggerating, telling her that wasn't how it went at all. The funny thing is, Aunt Martha never paid any attention to her sister when this occurred and went right on telling the story, most likely adding even more fiction to them just out of spite. Grandfather's loud and boisterous voice was always the highlight of the evening. He was truly the center of the family, and his love and pride toward all of them was evident in everything he did. He was also the one that everyone gravitated towards, and seemed to do anything they could to show their affection for, as well as win his approval. When he would approach the boy, it always felt like an opportunity for him. It was the opportunity to impress him, be his buddy. He had always wanted this very badly. Everyone did, it seemed. He just had that aura about him. But the boy always stumbled in his words to his grandfather and always felt like he had failed in making that connection, perhaps even embarrassing himself with his words and achieving the opposite effect of what he was going for. However, he was content enough in simply observing him, listening to him speak, tell jokes and laugh, and mostly, he was content with just the pride he felt in knowing that that was his grandfather. This was the gist of Christmas for many years, although in hindsight, the boy, now a middle-aged man who we will call Ben for the remainder of our story, felt it hadn't been that many years at all. In fact, it felt like the blink of an eye. Grandfather had passed 25 years ago, which was 6 more years than the time they shared on Earth together. And after he passed, the Christmas Eve gatherings pretty much came to a complete stop. As stated, he was the center of the family. And of course, over time, Uncle Spencer had also passed, leaving Aunt Cheryl not only a widow, but an unfortunate alcoholic who had battled many demons that left her worse for the wear. Aunt Martha and Aunt Louise had a falling out and never spoke again. No one ever knew where Aunt Martha lived those later years. She may have passed as well, for all anyone knew. As we age ourselves, we come to see that reality, unfortunately, isn't always warm Christmas Eves. On this Christmas Eve, Ben had planned to stay in and watch some of his favorite holiday movies with his dog Augie, who was certainly not the young pup he once was. Not that he had done much for the holiday in recent years, but this year in particular, he didn't even have any desire to seek any festivities nor plan any himself with his own children. He had quite the headache for some time now, and had been feeling uncharacteristically tired in this time as well. As the day gave way to the evening, he lied down on the couch and put on his favorite version of A Christmas Carol. As the opening music played, he couldn't help but think of his grandfather, as he often did, but more so at this time of year. He lamented in his head how he felt like he never got to make that special bond with him that he had always tried so hard to create. It had been a long time regret for him. Their time on the earth together was just too distanced by age, and the passing of his grandfather while Ben was still fairly young never granted them the opportunity of being two adults at the same time. One of the things he often said was that if he could have anything, it would be just a few hours talking adult talk with his grandfather over a drink or two. Ben embraced Augie, who was lying curled up at his side, and began to watch his movie. His eyes became heavy and he started to fade just as Marley's ghost was being introduced on the television. Something caught his attention that jarred him from fading any further. He had seen this movie upwards of 100 times, and knew it line for line, and knew every detail, down to the cadences of each character's speech. The voice of Marley's ghost, this time, although familiar, was not the voice of the actor portraying him that he knew so well. He stared hard at the TV. It looked like the same Marley, but something about the voice was different. "Do you not believe in me?" Marley's ghost asked. Of course, this is a well-known question the ghost asks Ebenezer Scrooge within the story, but Ben was taken aback when the ghost, in this case, turned from Scrooge and fixed its gaze outward, now appearing to look directly into Ben's room, looking at him. It slowly floated forward as if it were going to come out of the television and into the world. Stopping just short of that actually happening and never taking its eyes off of Ben, it asked again, "Do you not believe in me?" Ben didn't answer, of course. He felt he must have faded off after all, and this had to have been a dream. He tried to wake himself, and all the while Marley's ghost continued to stare intently out of the television directly at him. He noticed Scrooge in the background of the scene. He was sitting in front of the fireplace about to respond to the ghost's query, only he was completely frozen in his posture. The disbelief and scowl on his face appeared more an illustration from the book rather than the actor playing his part. "What's going on?" Ben said aloud. "You needn't try and reconcile your relationship with me," the ghost responded. Ben looked bewildered and didn't say anything, for the ghost now seemed to be speaking directly to him, and this was definitely off the script of the movie. "You were always the ship, and I was always the star," the ghost proceeded. "That's how it was supposed to be. I know that you have looked to that star many times throughout your life seeking guidance. Our bond is stronger than you can ever know. I see me in you, Ben. I always have." Ben thought he knew the voice now. "Grandpa?" he whispered aloud. "In life, I was your partner. Jacob..." The ghost paused, looking confused. "Oh, wait," it said. "That's the line from the story, isn't it?" It added, shrugging its shoulders and smiling, almost embarrassed, ever so slightly. Becoming serious again, it said, "I sense the passing of time will soon come to a halt, but fear not, Ben, for when time stops in one place, it begins in another." The ghost looked at Ben for a moment, and then turned away and floated back into the scene and directed its attention once again to Scrooge. Ben didn't know what it had meant by that comment, but his eyes were glued to the television. Scrooge, suddenly animated again, finally answered the ghost's question from moments ago. "I don't," he grunted. Their conversation continued as it always had, and on cue, the ghost let out the blood-curdling scream in which finally made Scrooge a believer of its presence before him. And with that scream and an excruciating burst of pain within his head, Ben was rudely and invasively returned to reality. He could barely move to hold his head for comfort. He suddenly had the sensation of a taste of metal, copper perhaps, in his mouth, and his surroundings began to take on a hue of pale red. It took everything he had, but he was able to turn just enough to take hold of Augie. He held him as tightly as he could against himself and said, "I love you so much." Augie stretched all four of his legs, let out a sigh of comfort, and perched his head upon Ben's neck, breathing ever so gently against it. The television, which was now flickering with images and sounds of the ghost, subjecting Scrooge to the shadows of what had been, began to blur in a sea of red, and slowly quieted to complete silence. This time, there is no question that Ben did fade out. And when he came to, there he was. The warmth of Aunt Cheryl and Uncle Spencer's. The Douglas fir looking glorious in its usual spot in front of the bay window. Behind the bay window if you were looking in from the street now adorned with a blanket of snow. Aunt Martha was spinning a tale while Aunt Louise rolled her eyes in disbelief. The children laughed and played in anticipation. The table, adorned with all the food, ham, mashed potatoes, soft warm rolls and plate of butter, and of course a giant bowl of pasta covered with the family's secret sauce and meatballs, looked like something from the heavens and emitted the aroma to match. And then he heard it, his grandfather's laughter. He slowly looked around to see him, as healthy as can be and exactly as he remembered him, sitting on a nice, big, comfortable chair in the corner playing with Augie, who appeared younger and more spirited than he had seen him in quite some time. A small old table stood next to the chair where his grandfather sat. It held a small lamp and 2 drinks upon it. Grandfather looked up and fixed his gaze upon Ben, his smile growing even larger. "Ben," he yelled, "come on over here and let's chat for a bit, shall we?" Of course, he did. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, everybody. Good night.